It's a really interesting time. So anyway, Barbara Marx Hubbard to these guys. Go. I hope I didn't interrupt you too much there.
No, you're good, yeah. And then so that was, and then so she for her this futurist project to sort of avert Malthusian catastrophe was not just a transhumanist project, but for her it's what she calls conscious evolution. For her, it's basic. There's a spiritual component to it, right? And so she borrows this idea of noetic evolution, or this idea of the noosphere from this Jesuit priest who was also a eugenicist. His name was Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. And he basically had this idea that there was a noosphere, right? And the term noosphere comes from the root nous, and nous was Anaxagoras' idea. He was a pre-Socratic philosopher. The pre-Socratics all had different ideas about what was the fundamental essence or the basic unit of existence of the universe. And somebody like Thales thought it was water, other guys thought it was fire and earth, and then eventually you had more sophisticated ideas like Heraclitus, who said it was the logos, or and Anaxagoras, who said that it was the nous, which basically was the mind, right? The mind of God, right? Or the intellect of the universe. And so the noosphere
is that kind of like, does that come from Gnosticism? Like, is that where the term comes from? Because like that's of course my understanding of basic Gnosticism is that there's a knowing boar smoking a pipe that created the universe, and the real God is behind and doesn't know it exists, and etc. Is that kind of from that?
It does, yeah. So the Gnostic stuff would come out later, and there's people argue about what is Gnosticism, because it's a broad spectrum of
definitely
different stuff, right? But and some of it doesn't necessarily agree with others. So your Sethians or your Valentinians, right, might not agree on certain things. But if you wanted to boil it down to the core, what most of Gnostic philosophies have at the core is a thread of Neoplatonism. And so the Neoplatonism is where you would get sort of a reiteration of sort of the concept of the logos in the nous, and this idea of that the demiurge being this lesser god that basically created matter and imprisons us.
That's who I was talking about. Yeah, the demiurge.
Yeah. Right. So for someone like Desjardins, there's a process by which the noosphere, the universe becomes conscious of itself, or the noosphere becomes conscious of itself through our consciousness, right? So basically everything has a certain consciousness or intellect in this paradigm, but the apex of that would be the human mind, human consciousness, right, which has self-awareness and agency in ways that the rest of matter and energy doesn't. And that and the pinnacle of our own human intellect is expressed through our ability to manipulate matter and energy through our technology. So the technology becomes sort of the icon or the idol of the noosphere that's manifest and expressed through the human mind. And so through the development of technology, right, the noosphere evolved from this sort of this permeating energy to a conscious mind or an agency to back into an artifact or material artifact that enhances our own human mind. And then at that point, we can sort of interface with that technology in a way in which, right, the collective noosphere through a collective cybernetic, through an Internet of Things managed by a super AI would sort of culminate in the final apex of noetic evolution. So for her, right, the evolution of technology is an extension of this, and our merger with it will basically be humanity 2.0, right? And so in that regard, right, and it will enable us, in her theory, to transcend matter and energy, not just in terms of like space travel and stuff like that, but if you start thinking of stuff like VR and AR, there's a whole movement that she sort of inspired or definitely influenced called the Hollow movement, and that also was inspired by, I forget the guy's first name. His last name's Bohm. He was a physicist, and he had sort of theosophical leanings himself. But he's sort of the guy that sort of starts to popularize this idea of quantum reality, right? And so what you get to is you can, in the same way that the Gnostics wanted to break out of the physical prison of matter and energy, they would have been through more stuff like transcendental meditation or psychedelics or asceticism or whatever it is. But now through these technologies, we can sort of get out of this prison and into this virtual world that can be entirely of your own making and your own creation, right? So you could go into a sort of a metaverse where you could basically, like do a Minecraft or a Roblox type of, basically build your own little space to live in. You could be whatever you want in terms of your avatar, right? So you don't have to be, I don't have to be 155 pounds, Polish American guy, right? I could be Frosty the Snowman and tall as a skyscraper, and right. And so you can basically, in that sense, transcend this prison and what they say is become your own god, basically. And so that's how her idea of transhumanist evolution sort of dovetails with this Gnostic concept. And as you mentioned, this whole idea of dissociating the human individual from his or her own consciousness, his or her own soul, it really dovetails also with the whole trans movement, in the sense that this concept of that your identity is entirely subjective, that it's not that your identity is grounded in, right, your biology and your in the material world, but rather, right, that your biology is somehow secondary or an extension of however you identify. And so if you can identify as, right, a different gender, why can't you identify as a totally different creature in this avatar? And ultimately what you get to is a place in which your virtual avatar or your virtual representation, another way to say it, is the data that sort of is aggregated to represent you in virtual space, becomes just as real as becomes just as much the core of your identity as, right, the physical you, right? And so obviously that leads to basically identifying more with your virtual identity, your virtual existence, which dissociates you more and more from your own human physical reality, your physical identity in the real world, human interactions.